Hi, all, and welcome to Dex in the City, where the wallets are cold and the takes are hot. First, we have Jessi, Web3 prosecutor turned Web3 protector at Ribbit Capital.
Hi, team.
And I'm your host, Katherine, or KK, fluent in TradFi and conversant in deep tech over at StarkWare. V is out this week, so we are so pleased to have a special guest and fellow Chicagoan here today, Edward Woodford, CEO of Zero Hash. We cannot wait to hear from Edward. But before we get going, remember, we're lawyers, but we're not your lawyers. So nothing you hear on Dex in the City is legal or financial advice, and it does not create an attorney-client relationship. For the fine print, check unchainedcrypto.com. We can't wait to dig in with you, but before we get started, we're going to hear from our sponsors that make this show possible.
The Energy Network is an intelligent, decentralized grid that coordinates smart devices to balance supply and demand. Energy Dollar is the native token of the network from one of Europe's fastest growing energy startups. Follow at Fuse Energy on X to find out more.
If crypto taxes feel overwhelming, you are not alone. That's why Crypto Tax Girl, a team that's been helping crypto investors since 2017, is offering $100 off on one-on-one crypto tax help. To get $100 off your crypto tax services, go to cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained. Again, that's cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained.
Welcome back, and we are so excited to dig in. We have some good stuff today. An update on the big White House meeting yesterday and an overview of where Clarity, the crypto market structure bill, stands. A really meaty conversation on AI, and it's absolutely fabulous because we really have a CEO and builder and an exceptionally smart and nice one here with us for his smart takes. So Edward, he is a real slacker, a serial entrepreneur and serial success story with an MBA from MIT. But seriously, Edward is brilliant and an all-around charismatic and good guy, and we are lucky to have him in Chicago and building in this space. So Edward, before we get going, tell us a little bit more about Zero Hash.
Thank you for that exceptionally kind introduction. And the only fact check I'll have is I got a master's from MIT, not an MBA, but everything else hopefully is true because that was exceptionally kind. So there we go. I won't question anything else you said. But yeah, just really quick, Zero Hash, we provide infrastructure across both crypto, stablecoins, and tokenization, and work with some of the largest financial services companies, such as Morgan Stanley, Stripe, BlackRock, across a whole host of products that we offer to clients. So we just view this space as a technology play, and we want to enable people to build on this technology stack.
Amazing. And, Zero Hash is really occupying this kind of crypto TradFi hybrid sweet spot right now, which obviously we're seeing huge growth. And a very important part of that conversation is where the environment looks like long-term in terms of legislation. So a very, very big item in the news this week was yesterday. The White House convened a meeting with crypto and banking executives to talk about advancing the Clarity Act, the crypto market structure bill that we are all hoping for. So very quick background on that. Both Jessi and I have spoken to individuals who were at that meeting. Really interestingly, they specifically invited the policy people to this meeting. They said, don't bring your CEOs. We want everybody to really get their hands dirty to talk through what is preventing kind of further progress on the Clarity bill. A big piece of that being kind of this question of yield linked to stablecoins that could fundamentally undermine, some of the bank's value proposition. A couple takes I heard that were interesting is I obviously heard from the crypto folks that they were open and willing to compromise, whereas the banking folks were not. I'll take that with a grain of salt. I also heard that there was a lot of discussion as to how to make progress in terms of horse trading. What could the banks compromise versus what could crypto compromise, how we could bring in theoretical movement on all aspects, not just specific provisions of Clarity. And then interestingly, this is a time mandate. whereas the White House made it very clear we expect everyone to make progress in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So very near term, get this done, get this moving. And that really aligns with everything I've heard, where this needs to start moving by the end of February, or we're going to see it, basically dead in the water, which would be very bearish for crypto in the long term, in my opinion. Edward, give us your take. How are you feeling about Clarity? How is Zero Hash feeling about Clarity? What is your sense? Do you think that this is going to get done?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you guys obviously have some unique takes. I think our view has always been around just the surface area that the bill tries to cover. And obviously different bills have been written, market structure, and then Clarity. I think for us, we're supportive of trying to really push the issues that matter most. And I think that is an area that I hope that we try and narrow some of the pieces of conversation, right? So, places where I think there's fundamental broad agreement versus trying to solve absolutely every single piece where there actually is a divergence of opinion, not only within the crypto landscape, but obviously you start to bring in other stakeholders. So for me, I think, if I could wave a magic wand, it would largely be around updating the definition of security, right? That really was what was the fundamental issue of over the last few years, was effectively an ability to enforce effectively regulation by enforcement, so being able to reel that back. And then I think there's kind of maybe more mundane issues, right, around, for example, accounting and tax. So this concept around having to file a 1099 if you sell $10,000 of stablecoins. How do we expect stablecoins to be a real application if you have to file a 1099 and that drives up costs and other pieces? So I think it's about narrowing the number of issues and really trying to push those forward. That is where I think you will get real traction across different stakeholders, different pieces. So that's kind of our view, is really pushing forward the issues where there is real impact and to drive it forward. I think what people don't really appreciate fully about the bill is, even if the bill gets passed, there's still going to be a pretty heavy rulemaking period for a couple of years. So this perception of what does it do from Clarity, it's not going to be an overnight thing. There's still going to be a lot of rulemaking that has to be done, which we've seen obviously with Genius. Genius was passed, and then there's rulemaking that has to be defined, and a lot of work that has to be done into that. So look, that's kind of our take, and kind of I think what are the real fundamental issues that we're trying to solve for. Almost taking a step back to take a bigger step forward.
You make such a good point, Edward, because while this interest debate is a big one, it definitely has sucked the air out of the room from many of the other issues. And it's one that we should be focused on, but instead, it has distracted from a lot of the other topics and issues that we can potentially narrow on. And therefore, it's sort of created these coalitions of crypto versus banking, or crypto versus TradFi, where each side is digging their heels in with this large principle of crypto saying, this is, allowing for interest is the only way to let the US thrive as the crypto capital of the world, while banking is saying, well, if you allow it, then banking is going to die. So with those stakes in the ground, it's very hard for either side to compromise. And it's so interesting, KK, your explanation, because I generally also heard the meeting was positive, and having policy people there was a really big positive, especially with a lot of the news coming out of Davos about Jamie Dimon and Brian Armstrong getting into it. Having the people that really know how to engage on policy issues is important. But when you talk to people on the banking side, they're saying that they're the ones that are compromising versus crypto. Crypto is obviously saying the other side of it. And it's hard to ever stand up for the bank. So I'm not here doing that. But the fact that the narratives are so separate, they're living in two different echo chambers.
Is it bad that I kind of love Jamie Dimon? I mean, the fact that he will tell other CEOs, regulators, government officials, you are full of shit, quote unquote. I mean, you got to give him credit as a
That's a privilege. I'm sure we all want to say that to people sometimes.
And he's highly intelligent. I don't mean to lionize bankers. There's also people in crypto that we need to lionize, and a lot of people criticize him for being so anti-crypto for so long. But to JP Morgan's credit, they've obviously pivoted. They have a very large team working on crypto issues. But separate apart from that, one fun fact, I also liked your point, Edward, about the 1099s. And as the resident history nerd here, I always like to remind people that 1099s were first introduced as part of the War Revenue Act of 1917, which required certain payments of at least $800 to the IRS. Okay. $800 in 1917 was roughly about $20,000 now. Yet still, we are continually faced with scenarios, particularly in crypto, where you have these tiny amounts of money that need to be reported if there's transfers. And that obviously creates a very onerous customer experience. So that's just one of, I think, many issues where crypto specifically feels unfairly targeted vis-a-vis TradFi rails. Edward, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think obviously everyone hyper focuses on basically regulation by laws, right? But I think that if we look at, I think it's important to take a step back, because I think we all lose sight of where we were, 18 to 24 months ago. I mean, I basically say, look, policy is one element, but if you look at actually some of the big progress that has been made, and what I think really needs to be codified and protected against in the bill, is to prevent what we saw, which was regulation by enforcement, regulation by implication, which is effectively agencies implying that if you do something that is completely legal, you will have an issue. And Coinbase has done a good job with FOIA and some of those letters. And then there's regulation by rulemaking, which was effectively SARB 121, which was effectively trying to dissuade publicly traded and bank companies from offering crypto because of the accounting treatment. So I always like to take a step back and say, look, what were the challenges that we faced? How can we codify against those? And that's why I go back to those core principles, which is you can effectively stop regulation by enforcement if you clarify what is a security and what's not. The other piece is, I think you should also think about how legislatively you should prevent them, but it's not necessarily a purely crypto issue, right? Around regulation by agencies effectively trying to bypass Congress. So I think really taking a step back and saying, what did we actually experience? What are we trying to prevent? I think is actually an important piece, because right now, I think the perception of, we're anchoring to where we are today versus we're anchoring to where we were 18 months ago. And really trying to prevent going back to that place, I think, is what we try to optimize for.
I love that. And it's spot on. And, one of the things that I really wanted to ask you before, I know Jessi wants to ask you some Zero Hash specific questions about where you are. You occupy, as I referenced before, a really interesting position, like very much working with a lot of traditional financial services players and also working with crypto. I tend to think, and I think a lot of people share this opinion, that clarity and legislation is the final unlock that would effectively open up another wave of trad engagement on chain with crypto more generally, because there is still seemingly a contingent of the more conservative players, more risk averse players that are afraid to wholly engage without that clear legislative roadmap. Do you share that opinion? How do you feel about that, like, kind of last unlock? Is it clarity?
Yeah, look, I think, again, I prefer to live in a world of nuance, and I think we just look at the facts, right? If you're a bank and you want to just go through each of our product lines. If you're a bank and you want to offer crypto trading, you certainly can with clarity today, in the sense of you can offer Bitcoin, ETH, Solana, as Morgan Stanley is doing with Zero Hash, right? Then the second big bucket is stablecoins. There's now clarity around the issuance of stablecoins. Yes, there's an argument around interest. But if you actually look at, I think we have to be careful what we ask for as well, because, the bill was passed, and then rulemaking is kind of, the rulemaking is kind of trying to interpret language that is intentionally vague. I think we would be very careful what we ask for. If the commonality, this is why I go back to my point. If we try to find commonality through vagueness, that is going to lead to what we've seen with the interest rate discussion, probably 5 to 10x, right? If the surface area is so broad. And that's going to leave it to rulemaking, right? And people have to be careful about, post midterms, what does that look like from a rulemaking perspective? That's why I'm like, hey, let's narrow the conversation. I think let's pull out. I think the compromise should be let's pull out certain pieces of the bill, because I think that will actually allow us to take bigger steps forward. And then on tokenization, every agency has come out repeatedly, whether it be banks looking to tokenize deposits or NASDAQ and others making announcements around tokenized stocks. The clarity is there, right? So I think I think there are elements that are critically important. I've kind of flagged what I think is important. But this promise of like this binary contract, we are already seeing, because of the pullback from regulation by enforcement, regulation by implication, regulation by rulemaking, we've seen huge adoption. Without those pieces, you wouldn't see a GSIB bank enter the space with zero hash on the crypto side. You won't have seen large institutions adopt stablecoins, and you won't have seen large institutions do to tokenization. So I think there's a lot that has been achieved in a non-legislative function, which I think is important to remember.
This is why Edward and I are friends, because we both love nuance, I think. And so I really appreciate that perspective. I'm going to have to disagree with you, KK. I don't think this is a final unlock. I think it could be a big unlock, but crypto has that problem of saying, once Gary Gensler's gone, everything's going to be better. Once a pro-crypto president gets elected, everything's going to be great. Look at Bitcoin prices today. Once this happens, everything's going to be great. There are so many issues we still have to deal with, and we're somehow giving too much weight to clarity and thereby too much weight to this interest rate conversation, in my opinion. Although it's very important, there are so many other things happening. Crypto's reputation is in the dumps. We have illicit finance like incredibly high right now on rails that not enough is being done with. If you look at that language within the bill, there's a lot of work that needs to be improved there. And so to me, I agree with Edward in that maybe minimizing what we're dealing with and taking like bites of the elephant in smaller bites, or whatever the saying is the solution here, because you're never going to be able to do such a large market structure bill that is specific enough that we won't have to rely on rulemaking or enforcement, because there are a lot of legal frameworks that rely on very broadly vague written statement legislation that was written a long time ago that is enforced through agencies and through prosecutions and through investigations. So we don't want that, because as Edward pointed out, and we've all recognized, that's what got us into a lot of problematic positions before and hasn't been great for the industry. So yeah, let's just like focus in and stop trying to do everything at once potentially.
And I'm just going to say, a CEO that understands nuance is actually a general counsel's dream. So good for you, Edward. Oh, my goodness. Well, very interesting takes on clarity. I'm going to hand it over to Jessi, because I know she has some other questions about some news that Zero Hash has been dealing with.
Okay, well, everyone's talking about the market structure bill, which obviously is hot right now with the meeting yesterday. But I also want to hear about the Mastercard developments that happened with Zero Hash. So rumor mill buzzing, you walked away from a very large acquisition. We don't want to fully trust crypto Twitter. We'd love to hear your perspective on what happened and how you got to the decision to stay independent, and what your team thought about it, just whatever details you could give us.
Edward didn't want to retire to an island just yet, right? Like, that's it.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a weird position with just the rumor mills that you have to eventually come out to deny something that you didn't confirm. But yeah, the space loves a story. Let's put it that way. So look, I think regardless of who the discussions about who the acquirer may be, our view is that we are at this incredible inflection point. We believe that we can achieve more in the next 2 years than we have in the last 8. So our metric for what we want to do in those 2 years is, can we move at a greater velocity? Can we make this business significantly bigger? And is this the best outcome for our team? And I think maybe starting with the outcome for the team, in terms of where we are in terms of the 3 business lines, crypto, trade, effectively, we're seeing a massive convergence of crypto companies and financial services companies. And we believe that we are the default winner in bringing traditional banks, financial service companies into crypto. And my view is that, for example, when you look at Robinhood's financials, Coinbase's financials, they're going to look very, very similar in 2 to 3 years. And I think that's broader. And there's a lot of competitive threats to traditional players with, for example, Coinbase launching their wealth product. So we believe that we can bring in companies that total trillions of dollars of market cap into crypto on that side. When you look at stablecoins and you see the velocity of growth in our business, we're exceptionally excited across the use cases, actual use cases, right? Not hypotheticals, whether it be around gusto payouts or account funded into groups like Interactive Brokers. And then on the tokenization side, you effectively went from something that was zero 2 years ago to something that now has grown into a multi-billion million-dollar revenue line item for us, and we're still very, very early. So our decision came down to speed and outcome. And it's always flattering to have acquisition offers. This isn't the first, it won't be the last, but we just truly believe that where we are, we can do more as an independent business, and can lead to a better outcome. And look, frankly, we actually care about the technology, we care about the distribution. And that's why for us, being able to build and actually have impact is the most important. And I think that then ties back into value, right? If you truly care about what you're building, it ties back into value. And you can try and get that flywheel. So yeah, look, it was a great, net great outcome for us. And we're excited to continue to scale our partnership with Mastercard, some of the areas that we've announced publicly. But yeah, look, we're really excited by the next phase of growth, which for us is no different. But it's going through those processes is always something. It was always interesting. You always learn something. You learn something about yourself. You learn something about your team. You learn something about what you want to do. And so net, I always try to take positives out of these situations. And the best outcome for me was we made the decision, and I'm super excited to come to work and don't even think about it's not like what if, right? Like if you build, you can't be an entrepreneur if you're always thinking what if we should take in the $100 million offer that we got offered, right? Like it just, for us, it's just about what we're doing next. And if you want to really look after, there are fundamental realities. You want to make sure you look after your team. There's lots of outcomes now with secondaries and all sorts of options. So I really do think there's lots of options. If you want to give your team a little bit of liquidity, you can do in the right way. But for me, it's all about velocity.
Now, do you have to only use a MasterCard when you go out to dinner?
Or never a MasterCard?
It's learning about networks. I mean, I think what's really, really interesting is you go and you spend more time with banks and networks. It's really interesting, right, about where you actually really start to unpack these businesses and these perceptions about who actually is that threat from stablecoins and crypto technology. I think that's always an interesting one. And I actually think the networks are incredibly well positioned, because really the way I view stablecoins is that they are an alternative payment method. They need to coexist with other payment methods. And so effectively what are networks? These networks are effectively network of networks that create interoperability. And if you look at the stablecoin challenge, it's about interoperability, cross-chain and cross-asset. And so actually the networks are perfectly positioned, because that's what they do all day, is effectively creating global interoperability across payment networks. So it is really interesting spending time and being fortunate to spend time, with the Visa exec team, the Mastercard exec team, bank exec teams, about how they view, obviously there's a defensive element, but actually what I've realized is a lot of these people actually view this as a really good offensive mechanism. If you look at Visa, for example, they had their earnings call. Their CEO talked about how stablecoins has enabled them to effectively have global waiver programs around card issuance. There's a lot of innovation that these groups can have. There are obviously competitive threats, and that's obviously what people like to focus on. But actually, if you spend time with these people, they make decisions partly based on competitive threats. But actually, what I've realized is they actually see huge growth opportunities.
I love that sort of reframing of who the competitors are and who aren't. And we sort of need to get you in front of some bankers to, I'm sure you know plenty of them, to explain how stablecoins might not sort of threaten their space. Question I have is, because you guys are really sitting in the sweet spot, crypto sentiment's down, prices are down, but stablecoin use is just really amazing and crazy. And the kind of thing that I think crypto and blockchain have been waiting for. And, we talk a lot about clarity and forget that genius is still being worked out. We don't exactly know what that's going to look like. We don't really have any genius compliant stablecoins yet, because we haven't gotten to that part.
Because it isn't implemented until 2027. I keep reminding people, I'm like, the law, it's not here yet, guys. So,
but they're genius compliant.
Yeah, quote unquote.
But I would love to hear from you. How has your business changed since that rolled out? Have you begun to see, is it just more institutions coming in? Have you thought of new use cases because of this bill? Are there things that you think could be built on top of it? How much engagement are you doing? All those sort of questions around the actual bill that we have passed.
Yeah. So I think when people look at Genius, I think definitely there was a sentiment shift that was incredibly helpful and can't be, I don't think can be understated, right? It definitely was a validity of stablecoins as an industry. But if you get down to the nitty gritty of what I think the two big outcomes are, one is I think you're going to see massive fragmentation on stablecoins, and what I mean by that is you're going to see many more issuers of stablecoins. So that's one thing. And the positive, massive positive, you're going to see massive distribution. And so for me, stablecoins is a network effect, and so you need distribution. And so we've coined this term stablecoin enabled accounts. And we released the stablecoin momentum report earlier this month, or in January, talking about why this is such a critical metric, right? The ability to access stablecoins seamlessly and easily. And so my view on banks and how they enter the space post-Genius is that they effectively use this as an APM in and out. The fragmentation piece, right, with many, many more issuers, I think actually increases the value of businesses like ours that effectively abstract away the complexity. I don't think people really understand what is the complexity with stablecoins. USDC is now natively issued on 30 chains. Then you have wrap tokens, and then you have this new construct of like USDCX. That creates a lot of fragmentation, let alone when you think about, let's say there's going to be 5 or 6 large stablecoins that also get issued. So the importance of interoperability and where we sit in the stack, I think, is only increased. So look, Genius, massive benefit for the space. But in terms of market dynamics, I think it's going to increase fragmentation, increase use of distribution. And that's kind of how we think philosophically about our business. It hasn't changed that much because that's kind of how we thought about it. But I think it's an acceleration of both those theses.
Amazing. Very astute take on all of this, because one of the other things I like about Edward is he's not wholly brimming over with optimism, but also not, you're a very pragmatic person with respect to this. And Zero Hash is in a really good place too, because unlike much of crypto, you actually are offering a solution to a problem that exists. So the whole ecosystem could do a little bit better job of finding those areas, fleshing out our own use cases. They do exist. We just need to refine them and move forward. Yeah, so we're gonna go to break in a couple minutes, but really briefly before we go to break, I wanted to spotlight something very important. Edward has written and published a book, which is—
He had a launch party.
I was devastated. I was not able to go to the launch party. I was very upset. I have never been to a book launch party, despite actually, contributing to a number of books. But this one was probably going to be the most fun launch party ever, because it's actually a children's book. It's called Stablecoins for Babies. And we're going to link, a link to purchase in the show notes. This is really fabulous. I remember talking to you, Edward, months ago and hearing that you were doing this and being very excited, because I had read one crypto book to my own children, a board book called Blockchain for Babies. And I was bemoaning the fact that there isn't more scholarship, like there aren't more crypto children's books. Yet I can read them a Berenstein Bears book that's called Dollars and Cents, that's all about pennies and balancing your checkbooks. And I'm like, I'm not going to read this nonsense to them, just going to confuse them as they get older, right? Yeah, exactly. That book obviously needs to be taken out of print or updated immediately. So really quick, Edward, tell us more about this book, and we'll highlight Crypto Good News link to that, and then we'll go to break.
Yeah, look, I think it's a stretch to call it scholarship. I think the total number of words is maybe 150 words. But look, I think it was a really fun exercise to do. I got enjoyment out of just doing it myself for my daughter. But I think it is. I think it's a great. It's been a great gift. I mean, the excitement that I've seen. I mean, people I don't know have sent me messages. I mean, it's been really fun, and frankly, it's all for a good cause. All profits go to a literary charity. So it's, actually, you mentioned Blockchain for Babies. Actually, Jessi got that book for me when I had my daughter, and so I looked at it and I was like, this is good, but I think I could do better. And so.
My crappy present was your inspiration.
It was a great present, but I just thought I could make it a little bit more fun and edgy. So the story is around Steady Eddy stablecoins and how it kind of differs to fiat. And that sounds pretty dry, but it seems to be that the enjoyment has been there from kids, but the majority of readers, I think, can't articulate that they didn't like the book. So that's also a good audience as well to sometimes target. So yeah, it's been great fun, and the uptake has been great to see.
I have the book. It's excellent. I've read it to my kids. They give it 2 thumbs up. I do have to say, hilariously, my son's 2nd grade class is in the middle of their economics unit. And I very awkwardly during a teacher conference last month was like, do you want me to come in and talk to the kids about crypto? And the teacher was like, that's a nice offer. I'll let you know. Like clearly was both turned off, confused, disoriented by my offer. And I was like, it's a real thing. I'm a real person in a real company. Anyway, I have not yet been invited to speak to the 2nd grade class, but if I do, I will be bringing that book as part of the scholarship to be studied. So really quick, our crypto good news this week, it's not exactly crypto, but it counts because the organization where all of the profits from Edward's book go to is really a fantastic organization. As he mentioned, it's designed to promote children's literacy, which I think we can all agree, like, what is more important? It's called Reading is Fundamental, and it is, was founded on the insight that inspiring the joy of reading is essential to helping children become skilled readers. And there still remains a U.S. literary crisis, and this organization is a really fantastic nonprofit that's been around for 60 years. So please check it out. And buy Edward's book. So on that note, we are going to hear from our sponsors that make this show possible. And when we come back, we're going to dig into AI, all things AI, and the craziness that is Moltbook.
The world is about to see one of the largest infrastructure shifts of the century. New technologies are using more energy than ever before, but our legacy grids can't supply the demand, and we are barreling towards a global bottleneck. So Fuse is rebuilding it. The energy network is an intelligent, decentralized grid that coordinates smart devices to balance supply and demand. The network harmonizes existing infrastructure, increases grid capacity, and unlocks low-cost, clean energy. Energy Dollar is the native token of the network. The more electricity the world needs, the higher the demand for the energy network. The value of energy dollars may fluctuate. From one of Europe's fastest-growing energy startups. Follow @Fuse Energy on X to find out more.
If you're looking for help with crypto taxes, Crypto Tax Girl is offering $100 off for Unchained listeners. They provide personalized crypto tax reports and returns, and spots before April 15th are limited. Go to cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained to save $100. Once again, the link is cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained.
So we're back with Edward Woodford, the CEO of Zero Hash, and we are talking all things clarity, but now we're going to shift to AI, and we're lucky to have Jessi, who is really the queen of AI. And this is an important topic to talk about right now because Moltbook, a Reddit-style forum where only AI bots post and humans watch, went completely viral on crypto Twitter, on X over the weekend, triggering a whole bunch of stuff. Some of it, a hot mess, a meme coin. Jessi, tell us more what's happening, why, and then we're going to get Edward's take on all of this too.
If you, unlike me, had a life this weekend, you might not have been following this chaos that is Moltbook. And you described it perfectly. It's pretty much just a Reddit for agents. So a social network where humans can watch what's happening, sort of like you could go on Reddit and see what other people are talking about, but they can't provide any input, and agents are collaborating on it. So as KK said, it emerged just a few days ago, but it's already a bit of a spectacle and something to be learned from for crypto and for all of tech and humanity in my mind, but don't want to go that far yet. But essentially what happened in just a few days is agents formed factions, they built communities, they started fixing bugs in their own code so they could self-improve. I'm just going to take a pause there, which is, that's pretty crazy. But they also did much weirder things. So they formed a religion. I won't try to pronounce it. There's scripture for it. There's self-appointed prophets for it. And when the agents realized humans were watching, they began developing a language trying to avoid us watching them and understanding what was happening. They even wrote a manifesto about purging humans for being full of rot and greed, which is crazy, but also like not totally off all the time. And sure, like we can rationalize this away as it's not sentience, it's just pattern recognition. That's how LLMs work. But regardless, what it is agent-led coordination and a form of persistence or survival, but I won't use that word because we're not there yet. Persistence is sort of the term that's used in the AI community. And that's all before transactions entered the story. And to me, that's where things get pretty odd. So in the middle of Moltbook coming up, something called MOLT Bunker appeared. And so just imagine this, a landing page that you go to with just one line on it that says no kill switch. MOLT Bunker essentially is infrastructure that lets AI agents replicate themselves across servers. So if one instance gets shut down, another spins up somewhere else. There's no centralized host. There's no single point of failure, decentralization, persistence, or survival by design. So doesn't that sound a bit familiar to people that have worked in crypto? And, MOLT Bunker may be human created. Like that's probably what happened. We don't really know. But the story behind it that's creating the lore is that agents realized they were vulnerable to being turned off. So they pulled resources and built survival infrastructure. And how did they pay for that infrastructure? Crypto. Specifically, there was a token created called Bunker that's on Base. And with this token, there's no centralized control because it's crypto. And so no one can turn the financial spigot off for these agents now that MOLT Bunker is created, supposedly. So in other words, for these agents, crypto became their true superpower because it gave them the ability to buy persistence. So if they can pay for it, they can keep running. No one can turn them off. I just think this is so like meta maybe because crypto has always been pitched as financial freedom for humans. But for agents now, crypto is this operational freedom from deletion. So behind the memes that KK was talking about, the crazy stories, a lot of things that are just made up that you can't believe on crypto Twitter because what else is new? There is an experiment happening here, which is autonomous agents in a crypto native environment that can coordinate and pay for resources and route around shutdown. So that's sort of the layout of what happened. I'd love to hear Edward and or KK, your perspective on this, and especially how it relates to like agents interacting on change. Like who is our customer if you're offering stablecoin rails? Who is our customer if we want to engage in agentic commerce? And what does this all mean for fraud, for real-time payments, for all of that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great tee up. I mean, I think you could even go to the nth degree, right? Like you're seeing like we, for example, internally, we built AI tools to effectively vulnerability scan ourselves and smart contracts. And so in theory, to take what you said to the nth, not even to the nth degree, just 1 degree further, is effectively AI has proved itself incredibly good at finding weak links. And in theory, you could have agents just start hacking in order to actually get Bitcoin, for example, or Ethereum. I do think what's really interesting in this, and we've spoken about policy discussions and kind of framing, what AI has done, what the AI industry has done exceptionally well, there's something for this space to learn about, which is they made AI interesting and accessible. And so there are all these valid concerns, but you're not seeing kind of Congress and regulators globally come in and just kind of, they've been very good at kind of the public image framing and frankly, finding a single message across AI firms. Whereas in crypto, you see, if you're a legislator, you have 10,000 different voices come at you. So I think just on this AI piece, it's a very real concern. But actually, if you look at how it's perceived from the policy side, I think there's actually something to be learned about. It's obviously interesting in terms of like how you define humanness, right? And it's interesting to think about, groups like WorldCoin and others trying to prove humanness. I think at the end of the day, from like a financial services company perspective, AI effectively have to roll up to either a person or a non-natural person. And so AI has to roll up from a KYC perspective, and you have to be responsible for your agents in some, in that sense. And from a monetary perspective, you're ultimately liable for those pieces. So I think it's almost like code, right? If code goes rogue, you're responsible as a firm. So I think those are some of the takeaways I have. But it is fascinating to get kind of your overlay of what we saw happen.
Yeah, I have so many responses to that. But one that I think is really interesting for crypto to think about and learn from is our concept of like software developers should not be held liable. And I completely agree with that. That's something that, we have all been pushing in the industry. But what happens when it's software that's enabling these agents that are then engaging in fraudulent commerce or hacking? So who is liable then? The whole concept of liability just needs a reworking and a reframing. And that narrative, in my mind, really started with how crypto and software development and DeFi was talked about. But it's even more so becoming timely and essential to focus on with AI agents, because if I said press go on my AI agent to go buy something on Amazon because I needed it at my house, but then that agent goes and does 10 other things that I didn't understand it was doing, is it the developer of that? Is it the AI hoster of that? Is it me for pressing the button? Like, where is that liability fall? And how, like, stablecoins being the mode of payment, or any sort of crypto being the mode of payment, how do we enable that to grow for AI agents while simultaneously putting in guardrails, which is a lot of the same conversation that we talk about with crypto anyway. AI agents, for me, is just getting us to that space really, really a lot quicker. And I agree that international regulators have somehow not been able to get their act together, despite the EU AI Act, despite what's happening in California, despite New York, because nothing horrible has happened yet. And that is what is going to initiate it. And I don't want to put too much into Moltbook. Any one of these could turn into the experiment that requires us to really respond.
So when the robots take over or hurt someone or do something terrible. So I liked Edward's point. You make a very important point where if there is a centralized party involved in utilizing AI in any form, then there needs to be accountability from the centralized party perspective for that AI functionality, for that agentic activity. And this also goes to the interesting question of kind of corporate liability generally. And, as many of our listeners know, my private practice background, I spent 12 years in white collar defense, defending large corporations in US government investigations. And so the case law usually says a corporation is liable for the acts of its employees. Now, a lot of times a corporation will argue that an employee went rogue effectively, went outside the scope of its duties, did bad things, thus the corporation is not liable. I'll be interested to see if we see that kind of argument vis-a-vis AI, now that just using Moltbook anecdotally, you can very easily see how the agents can go rogue. So it might arguably be more difficult to control AI-driven activity than human person. So that's actually somewhat disturbing when you think about it. If I were a corporation, I would want to grapple with how I can utilize this technology to save costs, drive efficiency, all of the obvious advantages of AI, but also ensure that I had a crystal clear mechanism of kind of drawing very, very specific parameters around the limitations of that activity.
Can I add some other crazy things from this? Someone started a website where these agents can then engage and hire humans to do physical things in the real world. So there's like one of these examples, and part of the problem is really like working through the froth here and what's real and what isn't, because a lot of this stuff is being built by people and then enabling the agents to go in and see how they react, and obviously leading them a little bit in a certain direction. And a lot of this is built on crypto rails and or leading to crypto scams, when in fact, this should be the aha moment for the AI crypto convergence, which is something that people have been searching for. and it's right here in front of us. So let's not get rid of this moment with, pumping and meme stocks and any of that. Like, let's just focus on how amazing this can be and put the proper guardrails in place.
Yeah. Well, why, just Edward, to double click on this, why is it important that the agent economy have zero hash? Like, do you see growth of your fundamental business proposition? I think you alluded to this a little bit, but to really emphasize that, because a lot of people think, okay, crypto's growing, tokenization's growing, right? There's an acknowledgement there. And some people view AI as wholly separate from crypto. And of course it is in many ways. My joke is that it's always AI, crypto, and cannabis sitting in a corner, like the corner of shame, but the corner of money-making growth shame, where it's like everyone likes to throw shade on AI, crypto, and cannabis while they're secretly asking us for jobs because their jobs are being eliminated by our technology. How do you feel about AI and the growth of vis-a-vis stables specifically and zero hash functionality?
Yes, I think Jessi raises a good point around making sure that you build out the right controls, right? So if you think about deployment of agents, you could in some ways leverage MPC around certain policy quorums and actually cryptographically embedding controls into that. So you could imagine, like in a really simple example, a non-scaring example, an agent, you give it authority to spend X amount of money, but beyond a certain amount, it triggers a policy requirement that requires either another agent or a human to get involved. But I think what really excites me is around really the agent-to-agent transfer of information. And if you think of a world, for me, it could be very, very creative if you think about creation today. So, if your agents come in, they're scraping the internet, people that are creating content aren't getting paid anymore because effectively you're not clicking through to the website and they're not getting referral links or ads. That's why I think what Cloudflare is trying to do is super, super interesting around effectively gating agents into certain sites and effectively transfer of ownership. If you actually think about what's happening there, effectively, it's a data transfer for a monetary transfer. And if you think of a world where you have millions of agents and you have billions of websites and billions of sources of content, how are you actually going to do that in a global world with people across the world? And I think that's where programmability of money really steps in. So you can imagine an agent paying for effectively tokenized data and swapping that for stablecoins. Now, I don't think of a world in binary forms. I think there are ways, like if an agent, if it wants to buy, if I say, hey, agent, buy me my Whole Foods order, I think that's going to be effectively authenticated through existing rails. But I think where stablecoins have a really unique place is more from an agent-to-agent communication mechanism and around billions of microtransactions in a network that is incredibly complex and incredibly decentralized.
That's such a great point, especially because the sort of agent money-to-money payment is still so nascent. I don't know if anyone here has tried to build. I'm not an engineer, so I'm maybe not the best person to be trying to build on X402 or any of sort of the agentic commerce platforms. It has a long way to go. That doesn't mean it's not exciting, but that means that there's opportunity to sort of build in the guardrails and the checks and make it just information sharing if that's what we think is appropriate.
Absolutely. Well, Edward, we can't thank you enough for joining us, for your time, for your energy.
And for your friendship in Chicago. I didn't want to pour it on too much, but Edward was my first friend in Chicago.
Wasn't it a tie, Jessi? Excuse me.
It was close, but Edward and I went to a steak restaurant with a bunch of people and neither of us eat steak. So that was when we knew.
Okay, accidental bonding. I mean, I love steak, so sorry, I can't identify with this conversation right now, but we like vegetarians, vegans, all listeners of any consumption of Dex in the City. Thank you, Edward, so much for joining us. Everyone check out Edward's book, Zero Hash, doing really big things. And thanks to our listeners. We will see you next week on Dex in the City.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unchained, your no-hype resource for all things crypto. I'm your host, Laura Shin. Thanks for joining this live stream. Before we get started, a quick reminder. Nothing you hear on Unchained is investment advice. This show is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and my guest and I may hold assets discussed in the show. For more disclosures, visit unchainedcrypto.com.
The Energy Network is an intelligent, decentralized grid that coordinates smart devices to balance supply and demand. Energy Dollar is the native token of the network from one of Europe's fastest growing energy startups. Follow at Fuse Energy on X to find out more.
If crypto taxes feel overwhelming, you are not alone. That's why Crypto Tax Girl, a team that's been helping crypto investors since 2017, is offering $100 off on one-on-one crypto tax help. To get $100 off your crypto tax services, go to cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained. Again, that's cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained. Today's topic is crypto and AI, plus OpenClaw, Moltbook, and how all of this impacts the economy, work, crypto, and the future of money. Here to discuss are Michael Casey, chairman of the Advanced AI Society, and David Mattin, co-founder of The Exponentialist. Welcome, Michael and David.
Hi, Laura.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
So this past week in AI has been absolutely riveting. It honestly reminded me of a week in crypto where just all of a sudden there's event after event after event. And it started with Claudebot, whose name has become OpenClaw now. And that is a personal AI agent. It runs directly on your own operating system. People have been putting it on their own Mac minis to be separate from the normal computers, although, of course, that's not too much of a security measure, but that's a topic for another day. So OpenClaw can use applications to do things. It can handle your emails, your calendar. It can transact with other online services. It has a persistent memory, which allows it to kind of tailor its actions more toward your preferences. And then the OpenClaw AI agents basically got their own social networking site, Moltbook, which is kind of like Reddit, but for AI agents. And some of the agents have even been launching their own crypto tokens. So the last development that I noticed is that there's a website, rentahuman.ai, which is for agents to rent humans to do physical tasks in our meat space world. And basically, there's just been so much that happened. So I'm just going to start with an open-ended question for both of you, which is, I was just curious to hear, from each of you, which either incidents or developments you found most interesting with everything that happened recently. And Michael, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, like I think for me, well, pretty much as you described it, how rapid from Claudebot to Moltbook, and then the discovery of how broken it was as well. And I think to me that in itself is the biggest lesson, that there's just it's an acceleration of innovation. I think at the same time though, that there's a lot of exaggeration of that, right? It seems unbelievably fast what's happening, and these bots going wild and talking to each other and establishing their own religion and everything else, right? It just seems like it's getting way out of control. But we've also got to just really step back and think about what's happening, right? Like what are the actual processes underway in these things, right? They're not thinking, that's one thing, right? They are probabilistically coming up with a language to share with each other and conversing with it. There's not actual intent. This is a really very important point, right? That there is a process. There's almost a performance to this, and yes, that's important. I'm not trying to dismiss it, but I think the way to look at, and I've been looking at this for the last 6 months right now, like the whole debate over the bubble, right? For some reason, I think I'm capable at the moment of holding both positions in my head. It's not like I can't decide, is it a bubble or isn't? I think we're simultaneously in a bubble and in a situation that is truly remarkably moving very quickly. And the same with this. It's like there is something profound that has happened when you put all these agents together and give them this autonomy. It's sort of taking all of the energy of, say, DeFi as well, right? I think this feels somewhat familiar to crypto people because we saw this with the composability of DeFi and people suddenly creating all these wild new contracts and everything else. And now it's being just done by AI. So we get that, right? But at the same time, these are still human. Interestingly, the mistakes that happened with the rollout, by the way, I don't know if you guys know, but Matt Schlicht, the guy behind Moltbook, is a former crypto guy, right? I knew him from 10 years ago when he had Zapchain, which was a very early micropayments protocol on crypto, well before DeFi. And so that, there were some big errors, right? There were these security holes in the whole thing. That speaks as much to the human component of this. There's been some analysis of how many bots are actually on there and actually doing this, and how much are just kind of performative things that people are putting out there. It's not necessarily as massive and transformative as we think it is, and yet it is also a profound kind of experiment that has really demonstrated where things could go as this progresses. So I know it sounds like a hedged answer, but it's
no, I know.
Yeah, it's just kind of
it's like
two camps.
Yeah, it definitely kind of represented sort of a new advancement, and yet at the same time, when you like really pull back the hood, you realize, okay, there's actually quite a lot of limitations here. David, what were your thoughts? Like, what were the things that you especially noticed or, found yourself fascinated by?
Yeah, the speed is insane.
Yeah, that economy bit is really what prompted me to pull this episode together because I feel like we're at this really interesting moment in time. And this is why I invited Michael as well, because he spent so long covering like foreign exchange and stuff like that. Just we're at this moment where I just feel like there's so much geopolitical uncertainty. And obviously the way the year started with, Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela being captured and, brought to the US, like, this whole run up in the price of gold, finding out all these central banks are buying gold, like there definitely seems to be some awareness that the world order is changing in some fashion. And to watch these events playing out this past week kind of added yet another element to that. And even if I think about like my tiny company, we also replaced some roles with the AIs, like not even like an OpenClaw type of AI, but like the more basic ones, that just people have been using for a while. And so if I just think about how many jobs probably have already been affected by AI, and I look at what we saw with OpenClaw and just kind of the additional level of agency that these AIs had, I mean, it just makes you think, whoa, what changes are happening in the economy? So maybe talk a little, because you guys are closer to the tech, I'd be curious to hear you opine on, what you think the next developments will be like over the next year, 2 years, and how that will affect jobs, which sectors or industries you think will be primarily affected, and like how that will change the economy. I know it's a very big question, but and either one of you can start.
Well, I'll actually use that as a cue for me to make my own shameless pitch, and it's not for a product. So remember, these days I represent a not-for-profit, so maybe that gives me an excuse to sound a little shilly. But we're all about trying to make the case that the most important, that essentially there's a new category of technology that's going to have to emerge, and we think it's going to come very rapidly through the demands of compliance officers and boards of directors and hopefully maybe even regulators. And it's a category that we call proof of control. That at the end of the day, as this chaos gets unleashed, the backlash you're going to get from enterprises, from governments, when they say, wait, how do we know that this agent is operating truly on my behalf, right? And that's actually a complicated thing to answer. There's a sort of life of their own that these AIs have. But there are a host of technologies that give a lot more control over the data, over the systems themselves, over the compute, over the various elements of the whole AI stack, which interestingly come from the crypto world, right? They're not all of them do. There's others that are part of what we call the proof of control stack. But I think we think this is going to be probably the biggest kind of backlash outcome from all of this is that we're going to get this demand for control. Now, what's interesting about the geopolitical piece on this is that through that, we have the emergence of some tension around what truly do we mean by sovereign AI or sovereign data as well. Because if you use it in a political context, and I happened to be in that little stupid Swiss town last week, was it the week before, whatever it was, time's flying, the week before, where of course sovereign AI was up there, and there were people talking about like which government's going to own their AI and where's the data going to reside, which is an absurd idea in an open AI world. Data doesn't reside anywhere now; it moves everywhere, and yet that is the construct around what this geopolitical fight is. Like our assets, government control, government's got this sort of wall around it, and they end up becoming closed box, a black box, closed systems that are answerable to this sovereign power, right? But a sort of a more, I think, empowering and actually I would argue principally necessary way of thinking about sovereign AI is kind of like the enlightenment of what sovereignty is. Right? Rousseau's idea that the sovereign is the human, and the human gives the power to the state, right? So self-sovereign identity, as you remember that phrase that used to be around for a while, right? This is still a concept. And I think that at the end of the day, whether it's a person or a company, what's going to happen as this stuff we're just going to get so scared by it all, right? Rightfully so, that we will demand these systems of control. And the nice thing about cryptography and blockchains is they give you the proof, because it's one thing to say I've got control, it's another to say how do I prove that I have control. And so I think
just to make sure that I understand, so sovereign AI means that I, a human, am in control of this AI, or does it mean
I'm
like the AI?
that's a debate. I would argue, I want it to mean that. That's what I want it to mean. But
And so you don't think that, because so you probably know this kind of I think it was Balaji Srinivasan who came up with this, where he opined that someday there might be an Uber that's decentralized, and the Uber has its own, economics and can make its own money and, like pay for its own costs, but there's nobody controlling it. But you wouldn't like, or like your definition of sovereign AI is not one where the robot or the AI is sovereign. It's one where
like that. In fact, I think I would include in my definition of sovereignty the idea of a sovereign Uber or a sovereign self-driving car. It's not so much the concept that there is a bot that has this autonomy and its own quote unquote rights or whatever. I don't know that our legal systems are going to be able to adjust to that very quickly, but yeah, maybe we will. My point is more that we ourselves also need that individual version of sovereignty, that I've got control of my data and my identity and my AI agent, right? What I'm saying is that the word sovereign is typically used in this sort of, like we talk about sovereign wealth funds. That's a wealth fund for a nation state, a government. And that's, I think, where when you hear the word sovereign AI in a place like Davos, they're talking about European sovereign AI versus American sovereign AI versus Chinese sovereign AI.
Yeah.
That is a world of geopolitical nightmare, because these systems become inherently totalitarian under that structure. I'm saying that whether it's us or the bots, we need to define the sovereignty in this localized way. I also want, this is the point about proof of control, mechanisms by which my human version of that sovereignty has the capacity to have control or proof of control over an agent. Now, it'll have variety, it'll have forms of autonomy and everything else, and that's a complicated situation that we need to deal with, because are inherently built to grow and learn and so forth. But there has to be a means by which the human relationship and authority over what these things are doing is defined and understood, and is in a robust mechanical mechanism to have that control.
Okay, so David, you can respond to that, but then also this question about like what developments we might see in the next few years that might have an impact on the economy and jobs, and which sectors.
Yeah. I mean, I spend a huge amount of time thinking about this because I lead technology research for a research service called Global Macro Investor. It's Raoul Powell's research service that goes to institutional investors like hedge funds and pension funds and family offices. And one of the huge things on their mind right now, obviously, these are people trying to put the kind of big puzzle of the global economy together and understand where it's all going. And one of the massive things on their mind is, what the hell is AI going to do to all of this? If you look, I mean, and this is highly contested ground, right? If you look right now, there's no like slam dunk effect of AI on productivity. There's no slam dunk, clear, undeniable effect of this AI moment on jobs. But if you look very closely, and some people have done some very interesting studies on this, you can start to see kind of the shades of gray and the nuance, right? And one of the big findings is that in domains that we know are particularly vulnerable to large language models, or forms of knowledge work that we know are particularly vulnerable to large language models, you seem to be seeing a rapid slowdown in entry-level hiring, right? And they are domains like customer service, because you can now get a chatbot that's like 90% good enough at the end of that like little box, or at the end of the phone or whatever, to deal with like customer complaints and queries. It's things like graphic design. It's obviously things like coding, right? You're seeing a slowdown in entry-level hiring, like young graduate hiring into those kinds of spaces. So what's the first thing I expect over the next year or two? I expect that to continue and to somewhat accelerate. And as these models become more capable, I expect we'll see, the levels above start to become impacted in those domains, right? If you listen to people, the big tech companies, if you listen to Anthropic, the people who make the Claude model, I mean, I know they have a vested interest, but yeah, they're like, very few of our engineers like are writing much code anymore, right? So I think we'll see that continue. Like medium term, this is where what happened this week with OpenClaw and with Moltbook becomes a kind of window broadly on where I think we're heading, which is towards an economy that is populated, like, yes, still by human actors, but also by autonomous or largely autonomous AI actors, right? These AIs become actors inside the economy in their own right. And that is just a very disorienting, very destabilizing, chaotic picture. Like, we're not there yet, and it's not like one day a big sign's going to fall from the sky and it's going to be like, it's happened. It's going to emerge by degrees, right? But I think directionally that's where we're going. And what happened this week, as much as there was some shenanigans going on, there is some shenanigans going on with Moltbook, right? There's some people doing that. It gives you a window on where we're heading directionally. I think it does. And some of the stuff the AIs really are doing themselves.
Michael?
Yeah, I just think I would agree with David on this, the directional piece, absolutely. But I think it's also important to note what I was trying to get at before, that history does this all the time, right? We move forward and you get backlashes, right? It's these waves. And I do think that the human backlash, because we still control whether we like it or not, and hopefully, again, I want to actually have more control over this. We still control a lot of how we do this, how this economy works to a large extent. And I do think that there will be kind of backlashes against these sorts of things. And I think it's interesting to look at the jobs part of it, because I think it's nuts that all of this coding is now just being handed off to vibe coding. And not because these machines aren't incredible at producing massive amounts of code quickly. They are, and therefore there's huge efficiencies there. But it's about the sort of the critical piece. It's not that you can, because we know like hallucinations is a way to think. Just like we know what hallucinations are. We know that they haven't fixed hallucinations, and it's important to sort of use that reference as a way to think just more broadly about how close an AI can get to mission critical production, right? There's still a huge gap. And the reason why that matters is because if you're a company putting a product out into the market, be it software or customer service for that matter, through a chatbot, you damn well want to make sure that those cases at the edge, those marginal cases, are also going to get resolved. It's always at the margin where something disastrous happens. And these machines are just not up for that. And the bugs that are through this code. I mean, one of the criticisms of the Moltbook guy Schlicht was like, when people pointed out that there was this vulnerabilities with all the API codes that were in there, he said, I'll just run that through AI. I'm like, no, it's like. So there's almost like a religious belief in this. And this is actually also, I think, a really important point, right? I think that one of the greatest dangers we face, and I do want to get into some hardcore economic conversations. I don't know that of course, jobs are going to get disrupted. Jobs always get disrupted. The bigger question to me is like, who are we in this world? How do we get meaning and power? And that's a whole bigger conversation. But I do think that there's this risk that we face by overly anthropomorphizing what's going on. Right? When we use words like, oh, it's thinking, they're coming up with a religion, they're forming these alliances. They're not people, right? And that's I read this piece today I thought was really good. Like when people say, this guy just said, AI cannot overtake humankind. I was like, well, might not. No, there's actually a logical aspect to this. And he's just like, because it cannot have intent, right? So intent is a very conscious thing, right? Like we've seen all these Hollywood movies in which the robots have emotions and think for themselves and so forth. But what we're seeing when we get that emotional response in these nice sycophantic words, or the famous Kevin Roose case where Bing fell in love with him or whatever it was, all of that is really just this mimicry, this powerful mimicry system that has behind it no real emotion, no intent, no desire. Right. And so the real risk to me is not that they become, like Westworld machines and take us over, but rather that we do a bunch of really stupid things because we think they are us and they're not. Right.
Yeah.
So
well,
we can get back and recognize that. We can start to build systems of control around that to protect us, not really from the robots, but from ourselves making all the wrong mistakes.
yeah. One of the things that came to mind when you were talking was, I don't remember where I saw this, but it was at some point in the last few months. I think basically people realize, like you were talking about how the AIs don't want certain things, but actually I think that the way that they're kind of like primed to behave is to basically butter up their human. So they're basically designed to kind of always, like confirm their feelings, or like kind of kiss their ass, is maybe how to put it. But
Yeah.
What problem that created was something like I don't remember, it was some kind of psychological thing where the humans maybe weren't necessarily in their right mind, but the AI was sort of programmed to just constantly reinforce what their feelings were. And that,
Can I offer a really powerful example of what's dangerous about that? I actually heard this in a conversation with Clay Shirky yesterday, who's coming to speak at an event that we're doing. And he pointed out that there's been these people who have used AI, because there are pros who just spend their lives now talking to their AI assistant, their AI friend, their AI companion for advice. And he said in cases where there have been like marriage breakups, each
might be
person's
what
AI confirms that the other one is right.
yes.
You're in the right. And they go, and it just makes it worse, right? It just
Yes.
amplifies the adversarial structure of the whole thing.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, there's absolutely no denying that you see this so-called AI psychosis in the culture now. You can see people online who have been essentially hyped up by their AI to a kind of to a state of almost delirium.
Yeah.
And you see it among some people in your own life, you know, and that again, that is going. That's good. Well, number one, it's going to make the trouble we've had with social media and the impacts of social media on mental health, and in particular mental health of young people,
100%.
it's going to make that look like a quaint throwback to like the good old days. Because what is coming, the fire hose of trouble and controversy, legitimate controversy that's coming over the relationship that people are cultivating with these AI like companions is crazy. And I think that the conversation about who are we, what really is a human being, and what really is the purpose and the meaning of us is the ultimate conversation that we are thrown upon by the technological conditions that are emerging now. In the end, the question they pose to us is, what really are we? What really is a human being? Like, and we spend a lot of time in the Exponentialists talking about this. Like, you know, we set up the community to talk about kind of the economy and technology.
I feel like I want to go work for you guys. The Exponentialists like you
we end up talking about the meaning of life. Yeah, but it's totally symptomatic or characteristic of conversations about all of this that like very quickly they just trend immediately to like, what is the meaning of life? And in short, like, you know, the core truth to understand is that these machines, intelligent machines, can colonize ever greater domains of human activity. Okay, and they are doing, but that then causes you to ask, okay, what is left at the end of that journey? And there's a simple truth at the end of that journey that helps us make sense of it. And that truth is, a machine can be as intelligent as it likes, but it can never be a human being. It cannot share in human subjective experience. It cannot be a language bearer, a bearer of subjective experiences of the human kind. It can't sit opposite a human being and authentically say, I know how you feel. I understand how it feels to be a human being. That is the territory that's left to us when machines can do almost everything. And that is a vast territory. And human economic exchange and meaning and purpose will reside in that territory when the machines can do almost everything else. If the purpose of us was to be a great coder or be great at maths, or even to like push back the frontiers of knowledge, to make money, all that stuff, then we're kind of obsolete. But I don't think that was ever the purpose of us. The purpose of us is to share in what it means to have the way of seeing the world that we share, right? And that's what they can never take from us when they can do everything else. That's the conclusion I've come to, in short.
Yeah. Okay. So just because there's so much I want to get to, and we're kind of running out of time. So I'm going to give you each 30 seconds to just tell me which country, going back to the geopolitical question, which countries do you think are better positioned in this AI race than others? And again, keep it super short. Who wants to go first?
I mean, it's, you know, the US is clearly very, very strong, right? But China is perhaps underestimated still, as much as we have our eye on them.
Michael?
I mean, I hope it is not a two-horse race, right? Because I actually, you know, again, I'm trying to advocate for a different model, and I very much worry that the Silicon Valley model, which is ironic, right? That the closed source black box model is a Silicon Valley construct, whereas China is the one that's got DeepSeek, an open source model, right? Ironic that the one that we thought was a centralized system did that. I'm actually very interested in some of these middle tier countries like Singapore and Korea and others that are exploring models that actually harken back to, let me say, the US Declaration of Independence, right? That in fact, we should be working hard to create a whole structure of property rights around data and control, and that will be a whole new power system rather than these centralized systems. And in fact, maybe a far bigger economic force if it does open it all up than these closed systems. And so eventually they might, you know, US and China might be competed away.
And I'll put in a quick shout out for the UK, because I'm just really pleased that Demis Hassabis of Google DeepMind, one of his stipulations when Google acquired DeepMind was, I want to remain based in the UK, and he's huge on helping to ensure that this intelligence revolution benefits the United Kingdom, and like literally that decision or that imperative of his puts the United Kingdom, I think, in a far stronger place than it would have been, because he is just so brilliant. And the things DeepMind,
he's earning his knighthood then, isn't he?
He's earned his knighthood for sure. The things DeepMind is doing are so important. So the UK is going to open its first essentially like autonomous science laboratory. It's going to be a DeepMind laboratory, right? Soon, because of that.
Yeah. So I think the main takeaway is every nation probably is trying to use this to get a leg up, which means all of this geopolitical uncertainty that, in my opinion, is part of the reason that the price of gold has gone up, is probably going to continue. So in a moment, we are going to talk a little bit about the post-human economy and what money in that world will look like, and also what the role of crypto would likely be in this AI-powered economy. But first, we're going to take a quick word from the sponsors who make this show possible.
The world is about to see one of the largest infrastructure shifts of the century. New technologies are using more energy than ever before, but our legacy grids can't supply the demand, and we are barreling towards a global bottleneck. So Fuse is rebuilding it. The energy network is an intelligent, decentralized grid that coordinates smart devices to balance supply and demand. The network harmonizes existing infrastructure, increases grid capacity, and unlocks low-cost, clean energy. Energy Dollar is the native token of the network. The more electricity the world needs, the higher the demand for the energy network. The value of energy dollars may fluctuate. From one of Europe's fastest-growing energy startups. Follow @Fuse Energy on X to find out more.
If you're looking for help with crypto taxes, Crypto Tax Girl is offering $100 off for Unchained listeners. They provide personalized crypto tax reports and returns, and spots before April 15th are limited. Go to cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained to save $100. Once again, the link is cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained. Back to my conversation with Michael and David. So, David, I want to hear about your concept called the post-human economy, which is a very, in my opinion, fun term. Explain what it is, what it looks like, and when you think we'll get there.
Yeah, the post-human economy it was an idea I introduced in a series of essays last year, and it's really just an attempt to sketch the outlines of the coming economy, an economy populated by AI agents and robots. It was partly inspired by, I think, I spend my life thinking about all this. I read a blog post by the technologist Kevin Kelly, one of the co-founders of Wired magazine. And this blog post was echoing so much of what I'd been thinking about. And it essentially said, we're on the verge of a kind of demographic handover. The human population is kind of peaking and will start to fall soon. And the population of AI agents and robots at the same time is like taking off. It's estimated that there will be billions of AI agents, right? These autonomous, intelligent economic actors soon. And we know robots are coming, humanoid robots are coming. Again, it's contested territory how useful they'll be, but I think they'll be somewhat useful. And I think there will be tens of millions of them and then hundreds of millions of them. The post-human economy is an attempt to imagine the outlines of that coming economy. And this gets quite technical and convoluted and worthy of many I found it worthy of many tens of thousands of words. But in short, it's about saying, when you get to a place where you have billions of AI agents and like hundreds of millions of robots and humanoid robots, almost all economic activity as we define it now is intelligence work. It's being done by AI, either AI agents, trading with one another and producing services online, just being economic actors online, or robots who are basically doing embodied AI. Like, the robot is using AI inferencing to sort of navigate around its environment and pick up that box and talk to the other robots and put the box in the right place at the Amazon fulfillment center, all of that stuff. Money, in what that does, number one, is sort of create conditions of radical abundance to a point where, hypothetically, money or material constraints essentially fall away, right? You have incredible material abundance, and material constraints fall away, and money as we have it today, which is a kind of measure, an accounting unit of material constraint, falls away. And then what is money in that post-human economy? It's really machine intelligence itself. So I posit an economy that is essentially populated by billions of AI actors trading with one another. And the unit of exchange they use is a crypto token that sort of represents a unit of useful intelligence work. And it's about, one AI actor going to another and saying, oh, hey, you're a marketing AI. Can you sort of produce me this PDF? Like, this is a ridiculous example, but, do what you do, produce me some marketing assets, and I'll pay you in units of machine intelligence. And they're trading this token with one another that represents like units of useful work. And the physical constraint that underpins that token is the energy required to do that work. So models that are efficient and they produce the same amount of intelligence for less energy, like they earn more, they prosper over time. Models that are inefficient, they can't earn, they lose in this Darwinian economy of agents, and they fade away. And you get this market process of intelligence optimization that is very dense. There's an essay, my newsletter is called New World, Same Human. So one of the essays, and this is called The Post-Human Economy, is free to read on my newsletter. So if you find that interesting, go and check it out, New World, Same Humans. But yeah, that's the outline of the kind of post-human economy I imagine. I must stress that doesn't mean I think that there won't be any value exchange between people, or that humans are becoming obsolete, or any of that kind of stuff. As I just made clear before the break, I don't imagine that to be the case at all. But I do imagine the building of like an economic system of the kind I described, and humans kind of playing elsewhere, so to speak, is the best way I can describe it. Yes.
Yeah, I actually have a question. Was that thought inspired either by proof of work from Bitcoin, or the way that in Ethereum, the virtual machine, like when you're paying, you pay for computation. That's what gas is. So, like a transfer or a payment is different from like minting an NFT, like because they take different amounts of computation. Was it inspired by that or no?
Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah,
what
partly. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Essentially, yes, it's the same kind of idea, and there are startups now playing with this, like one's called, there's obviously Bitensor, there's Ambient, there's a startup called Ambient that is essentially about trying to create an ecosystem like with a crypto token that represents like units of machine intelligence. So people are trying to build the early first draft architecture of this kind of what I call post-human economy, where energy in the end is the only true constraint.
But we might even fix that, right? If AI is smart enough to put, data centers in space run on perpetual solar or whatever it is, right? So
So well then, okay, so in that world, which I like, it makes so much sense what you were saying. And I don't know if it's just because when I mentioned about how I already had analogs in my mind for what that where that came from, or other analogs for that concept. But in that world, would humans still continue to transact in like dollars or whatever it might be, or would they also, because presumably humans will still have jobs in some way, or maybe they won't. Maybe they're just
jobs
going
is a
to
19th and 20th century concept.
maybe they're just going to have their own
We're
AIs,
roles.
and
We're gonna do things.
they'll have the AIs work for them, and they'll be business owners in that way. I don't know. But will this? So you called it a UIU, which remind me what that stood for. Forgot.
Yeah, like it's a
universal intelligence unit. Yeah. Or CogCoin.
Or CogCoin, exactly. Because one of the ideas I sort of then develop is like, and we were talking about this, before the show started, like, what is money? It's partly a form of civilizational memory. It's a record of value, ownership, and like transaction. Okay, that's one function of money. But money is also a currency. It's like it's a form of like resolving payments and value exchange. Okay, and the dollar, the fiat currencies we have to play both those roles. And actually, that's a bit of an awkward conjunction. So I imagine a kind of future economy where Bitcoin is the kind of civilizational memory. It's the store of value. It's the record of value. And this other token I introduced, the CogCoin, is what I call the civilizational intelligence. It's the currency. It's the fluid currency that resolves payments. And that's what these models are using to kind of pay one another for their work. Humans, I think, like they'll be able to earn value, I guess, as in the form of CogCoins, and then they'll be able to spend those CogCoins to get AI agents to like do things for them. But I also think that a lot of value exchange between humans will be sort of not measured anymore, and they won't have to be measured because there'll be abundance, and I hope we'll all be able to sort of enjoy that. But that will very much depend on the sort of political settlement that we put around all this, which is a huge and unknowable question. But what I do know is there's a huge argument coming over it.
I have to know what you're saying here. So you're saying that the agents will earn their money, but humans won't necessarily. What will like people? We're not going to pay each other for services anymore. We're just going to be like kumbaya, like, I don't know, bartering. I what does that look like?
It depends what, like, in this world, if you have autonomous abundance, if you have AI agents and robots essentially on autopilot, creating abundance and creating value, then the questions stop being that, you've solved scarcity, and the questions stop being around material scarcity and the creation of value. You've solved that problem. That's a very hard world for us to imagine, because that's been the problem we've always had to solve. But the problem then becomes one of like settlement and fairness and distribute, like a fair social settlement, I mean, and distribution, and essentially becomes a set of political questions. If we resolve to kind of share in that abundance somehow, then lots of the things we want to do for one another, we won't have to put economic value exchange around that. But yeah, of course, humans will be able to still participate in economic value exchange. Some of them will get rich, even richer. You'll still have like outlier humans who are really rich, who own huge amounts of AI agents and robots and capital, like making them ever richer and ever richer. But I don't think you'll have to be involved in that system, or at least there's a future in which you don't have to.
I have a question.
Be involved in economic exchange.
Can I jump in?
Go ahead, Michael.
It's about this abundance idea, right? So, which I generally agree with, that's where it goes. Like, you just mathematically, it resolves towards abundance, and therefore scarcity goes away, and therefore our very framework for putting value on anything goes away. So I would ask a question and say, like, well, why is there even any need for a kind of an economic idea of money within that computing world? Because everything is just universally available. And I would suggest that the reason is that these machines are actually built through their, token reward structure to compete on outcomes. And so that money becomes the means by whatever that money is, the cog coin, something like that, is a means of reinforcing the preconceived and pre-designed, machinery of advancement, right? The whole reinforcement idea that is the foundation of machine learning. And so that you need that kind of competitive edge for there to be a reward of some sort. Because abundance makes me think that we all become collaborative, and every at the end of the day, these systems might say, hey, we've got everything figured, let's just share it around. The problem is that without that competitive edge, they don't continue to grow. And so it's the sort of the inbuilt growth part that I think creates the money part. It's actually not necessary. Like we have everything. We don't need money. We can just share it everywhere, right?
Yeah, that is very interesting. That is
right?
very interesting. And that is very interesting. Yes, I think I see what you're saying, and I think I agree. And I do also think that energy will, I think, continue to be a constraint, because
I do
even
too.
if we build out like insane levels of energy, and there's like, infrastructure and space capturing the energy and all this stuff, AI and robots will still push to the edge of that capability.
Yeah, the law of
and then they'll have to compete for energy. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that there is still a constraint in that system that needs to be sort of measured and exchanged.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that what you kind of proposed there didn't make sense to me, simply because the world has finite resources. And even like we as humans, or even the AIs, their finite resource one of them will be time. Even like that's yet another sort of.
But the universe has a much bigger source of resources, right? And whether it's energy or asteroids, like once you sort of push your horizons out and you start to look, our human brain sees massive scarcity, and we've had that whole Malthusian way of looking at the world for a long time. That, oh my God, it's all going to run out, right? But in reality, the universe is infinite, and there's resource. And if you're a machine that can tap into that in whatever way, it could go on forever. But I actually think the point is not that we are going to hit these scarcity constraints that we think of. It's the scarcity constraints that we can't think of that will hit, because these things are going to be so much bigger. I will say, can I just a couple of points? It's just fascinating.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I just spend a lot of my time trying to think about these kind of macro systemic kind of things. I think that the idea of the intelligence economy is really interesting. In fact, my friend David Schreier from Imperial College is out there right now pushing this theory that the reason why we're not in a bubble for AI is because we're already moving to a world where intelligence capital is going to be what is being accumulated. And so if you think about it like that, it's like, now it's just an ongoing race, and it will always try to. And so then the money that we're putting on it now just actually is minuscule compared to how much that race for intelligence is going to get. And then the other thing is just to sort of mention a company called Hypercycle that I think is really, really interesting way of thinking about this. So Hypercycle is a full disclosure, it's a member of the Advanced AI Society, and I'm also an advisor to it. But I've never seen anything like this company. And they've created this network of these independent nodes. It's not blockchain based. Each node has within it its own capacity to exchange in a very secure peer-to-peer way with another node. And each node is incentivized to go out and seek intelligence if it needs it, and pay another node, another source, another AI that's behind that for that intelligence. The nodes run this kind of like network, and their whole way of thinking about where the value for their companies comes from is the idea that there will be eventually these nodes actually grow and expand. They're called node factories. They replicate to keep up with the demand, but eventually they reach a finite point. And so if you sort of extrapolate that out into the future, these things could become extremely valuable, because the Hypercycle is the name of the company. Like the hyper aspect of that intelligence expansion becomes just this powerful force. It's all, very, very early days, and who knows, there's all sorts of things that could trip it up. But I find that a really fascinating way to think about real world structural things that are being built now to play into that long-term intelligence economy.
Yeah, so I have a question because I'm sure there's people listening who are kind of like, what does this mean for my job? And I know that I have friends who have kids who are like in high school or college, and they're, talking about, oh my gosh, like, does this even make sense for my kid? Or like, what should they study? And so, what do you, we talked before about which industries are at risk, or which types of jobs are at risk. But which types of work do you think are best positioned to flourish, both in the transition phase, but also in the post-human economy?
This is like the most common question I get asked. So I go inside organizations and I speak about, AI and what's happening in the economy and what it means for the organization. And almost always at the end, at the moment, someone sticks their hand up and is like, that was really interesting. Thanks very much. But I have a more personal question. What do I tell my children about all this? It is the most common question I get asked. I get asked it so often that I wrote an essay called "What Do I Tell My Children?" And I actually, now you can publish essays on Twitter or X. I recently published it on X. So again, if people are wondering about that, go and check out that essay. It's on my X profile or whatever. Look, it's very hard. I think our ability to like really concretely know like which jobs are going to be around and which aren't, and how that plays out in a really granular way is very, very difficult. So it's more about the cultivation of sort of attributes and mindsets that will allow you to navigate your way through this as a very broad operating principle. And this taps back to what I was saying about a machine can never be a human being. Like, the domains of human life that cannot be colonized by machines will be the ones that are most impervious to, like being automated away. Jobs that are to do with understanding how others feel, right? Or to making them authentically feel certain ways, jobs where being an actual human being doing the thing is an integral part of the value of it, right? It's like, there's all kinds of music, but I want to listen to music from a human being who really understands how I feel, who's kind of has a life like mine. And, I love that guy and I think his hair's great and all that stuff. That's going to be how value exchange happens. Like, if your job is very much like a process, a bundle of processes, then it's going to be more vulnerable to being automated away. So cultivate human skills, cultivate empathy and genuine human connection, cultivate adaptability, like lean into your weirdness. I say in this essay, like cultivate what is particular about you, because on a little bit of a more granular, like if we want to get into predictions, I do think there'll be fewer like corporate knowledge work jobs, and there'll be more people working as independent operators, serving value in some form to like a community of people around them who love them. It's like, this particular person, I love the way she like does XYZ and really makes me feel good and understands me, like, and is local to me. So we can reach out. Like, it's going to be more like that. There's all kinds of ways we'll exchange value with one another. And the kind of true post-human economy I talk about is not happening tomorrow or next year or, within 5 years. So,
Michael,
we need to cultivate young people who understand in the end that what is really valuable about us can never be touched by machines. And that will be the basis of value exchange too. Not to say, sorry, my final point, not to say that there won't be a lot of disruption that will be, I don't want to diminish the way this will be painful for some people. Like, some jobs will radically alter or disappear. And in that kind of disruption, when you get caught in the crossfire and you're 50 years old and it's really hard to retrain, that's painful. And we need to think about what we do for those people.
So just to echo that last bit, because I think it's the right context and maybe caveat to say what I want to say. But like, because we have this mental framework in our minds of what a job is, and that our life is defined by jobs, and jobs are, then it is extremely difficult. And it's perfectly natural that these questions come up all the time, and it's appropriate to figure out what to tell your kid about this. But I will say that it's absolutely the wrong question if we're going to figure out where things are going, because jobs are a construct of a particular version of an economy, by the way, a capitalist economy in which there are these corporations and you work for them, right? It's already something that's gone, started going away with the emergence of the gig economy and everything else. What exactly is, I don't know what my job is anymore, by the way. I don't know what I do. I just do a variety of things. And so job is itself part of the problem, right? I think it's like, what is our function? What is also our meaning? And I think David was saying something really quite important, and it again reminds me of something. Another thing that Clay Shirky said yesterday that I was really picked up on, partly because it also validates some of the things I've been thinking about. And he said, like, one thing that these machines can't do, and it's an extension a bit of what David was saying. It's not just the fact that I'm a person who can understand and empathize with what you're doing. It's the very fact that when humans get together and talk and communicate and collaborate and do things together, that's a very different process of collective growth and development and change. I'm not even going to use like ideation here, because that in itself sounds too transactional. That is a thing that a machine can't do, precisely because they can't get the that empathy piece and that connection piece going. So if you think about it like that, then, and the way he put it, Clay Shirky, was like, the way that like a capitalist and sort of a Silicon Valley-ish way of thinking about things like meetings and gatherings of people is way too transactional. It sort of implies that the value is in information exchange. I've got something for you, you've got something for me, and we exchange that. And that's what these machines are going to be doing, right? The hypercycle model I talked about. But in reality, he says real human value comes from the way that we collaboratively figure out social conviction, that we find through this process of interaction with each other, a means of understanding what we all believe in and who we're going and what we're doing. It's actually a meaning machine. And so in some respects, the things that I want to do in the post-human world, if that's the right word for it, is to just get together in person. So I'm really glad I'm working on events, right? I've got this thing called H2H, which is we're putting on this event called the Summit on Human Agency, which is going to be my next big shill here. It's February 23rd. It's all about how do we, give humans agency, authority over AI. But more importantly than just that, which we're excited about as a topic, is the fact that you can lean into events as places where the magic of being humans together actually happens. Because when I go to all the events that I've been to over the years, and Laura, you and I have seen each other a number of them, I don't think, oh my God, I got something transactional out of Laura and she out of me and we walked away. No, I remember the good times we had together and the interesting, quirky things that happened and the humanness of that whole experience. And so if you can think about meaning and value coming out of that construct of human interaction and exchange, and not think sort of like transactionally, leave that to the machines. Let's get there, all right? And we'll all be fine if we do that, and so, yes, I think whether it's jobs that do that or just literally functions or activities, focusing on social interaction and making it valuable and meaningful for everybody. That strikes me as the thing to be doing.
Yeah, so we're basically out of time. So I'm, again, going to give you each 30 seconds. You have to give me just a list. I am curious because there's a whole bunch of different crypto things that are, taking advantage of this agentic AI movement, X402, ERC8004. There's a bunch of tokens. Just give me a list of the ones that have intrigued you, and we will wrap with that. David, do you want to go first?
Well, flowing out of this Moltbook thing, there's a token I read about called Shellraiser. Have you heard of that?
No.
It was apparently one of these agents on Moltbook kind of became a sort of celebrity agent. It did really well on the social media platform that is for agents, that is Moltbook, gained a lot of attention and kind of parlayed that attention into the launch of its own kind of meme coin on Solana. And the meme coin's called Shellraiser. Now, again, caveat, is that really the agent doing it, or is it some clever human doing it, right? But go and check out Shellraiser. But, very, very, very much not financial advice. Go and look at it because it's interesting. I'm not sure if I'd invest in it.
Okay. And Michael?
Partly because I'm the chair of an organization that has a variety of members, all sort of building their own sort of crypto and blockchain-based solutions to the proof of control problem. I don't really want to pick a winner here, but I do want people to look at that issue, just look at the variety of, they're not just our members. There's a whole lot of them, whether they are the ones who are producing the confidential compute pieces to that, whether it's zero knowledge proofs or trusted execution environments, whether it is decentralized compute and decentralized storage, whether it's model verification, whether it is the stuff like Edge and Node is, which is, there are just named one, but they're a sort of like a dashboard for data infusion that allows you to look holistically at all the data that's happening in agentic economies. All of that is going to be vital for this proof of control thing. So keep looking out for how these crypto and blockchain solutions are one piece of the puzzle that needs to be solved if we're to have control over all this.
Yeah, it's clear these are going to converge. All right, you guys, this was so fun. Thank you so much for doing it. And yeah, just thank you so much for coming on Unchained.
Thank you for having me, Laura. It's been great.
Laura. It was fun.
All right, everyone, coming up next, we are turning to the markets. Bitcoin has just fallen below 74K, its lowest level since President Trump won the 2024 election. And joining me is Joshua Lim, global co-head of markets at FalconX, to break down what's driving this sell-off, how positioning looks right now, and what to watch next. So stick around, and we'll be right back after this short break. Hi, everyone. I'm back now with Joshua Lim, global co-head of markets at FalconX. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, wow, we are in a position with these crypto markets where things aren't looking super pretty. And as I just mentioned right before we went to this break, Bitcoin just fell below 74K. And I was wondering if you think we're at the bottom, or where you think we are right now in the crypto markets.
Yeah, these levels are obviously distressing for anyone who's worked in the industry for quite some time, but also significant because these are levels that were only previously seen prior to the Trump election. So in many ways, we've given up a lot of progress on price, even though in terms of innovation and adoption and just the broader growth in the ecosystem, and think about all the developments that have happened over the last year, especially with Hyperliquid, there's been very little to show from a price perspective. Even you could argue that we've kind of moved backwards if from the perspective of many different altcoins and governance tokens that are staples of a lot of fundamental portfolios.
And so what do you think is driving this downward price action?
Yeah, and I think you're asking kind of what is the the sort of forecast from going forward from here. I think it's entirely going to be a function of how well risk assets can hold up, right? If you look at across the board other asset classes, everything is still near all-time highs, right? And a lot of that is because of the way the dollar is behaving. The dollar is weaker, and that generally is a boon to other risk assets. That has not translated to Bitcoin and to crypto generally. And we're so used to seeing the phenomenon of crypto trading alongside stocks or other risk proxies in a correlated way, right? And so this very large divergence, and in particular, I think the most stark divergence is between Bitcoin and gold. That divergence is wreaking havoc, right, with our whole industry and kind of how people are positioned. there's a chart that a lot of people are circulating, which is basically a chart of global liquidity overlaid with risk assets, and then another one with Bitcoin price. And Bitcoin is the only chart that's pointing downwards, while everything else is up and to the left, up and to the right. So that's very unusual. I think if we kind of dig into that and try to figure out what's the underlying cause, there's two things in my mind. One is, obviously it's a flows-driven market right now in Bitcoin. There's very little sort of fundamental catalyst to look forward to. A lot of the things that people wanted to happen last year already did, right? The kind of good things around policy and regulation, and even the inflows that we saw into different equity vehicles that hold crypto. All those things have transpired, right? So now looking forward, it's really very much a flows-driven market, and what we're seeing is like the flows, which are dominated by a lot of central bank activity and sort of like sovereigns building reserves. A lot of that is flowing into more established asset classes, in particular gold, right? We've seen China add tens of, let's say thousands of kilograms of gold to their reserve, and none of that is really flowing into Bitcoin. That's really the biggest difference in flows for our asset class. The other big thing, I think, and this is starting to get a lot of traction, right? Like if you go to TradFi meetups and things like that, people will talk about this as an overhang for the asset class. It's the quantum question. And that narrative, even though I do think that it's a solvable problem for our industry. I mean, the technology is, of course, adaptable, and the community can rally around a new form of cryptography for Bitcoin. That is an overhang, and that is a question that a lot of asset allocators and investment committees have to answer when they're deciding whether they want to invest in Bitcoin versus gold.
Yeah, yeah. And we had Vinny Lingham on the show at some point in the last few months, and he was saying basically just that if it's like the central banks that are buying the gold, those people, they're not into Bitcoin, they're into gold. So, he said it's boomers that are driving this decision. You probably have heard, because, well, I've asked this question a lot. A lot of people in the industry seemed to think that this cycle was going to be the one that showed that the typical halving cycle is not, functioning anymore, and that this is the cycle when we'll break out of it. And so even over Christmas break, and I think in January a little bit, I did see some people say that they still thought that later this year it would show that we really did break out of that 4-year halving cycle. But what do you think? What do you expect to see from the crypto markets generally this year?
So I do think that we're going to be in a prolonged range-bound market, right? And I think that, particularly coming out of the events of last year, like, the liquidations that happened in October of last year, like the whole industry has gone through a bit of a mini credit contraction type cycle, right? And we all experienced this like at the end of 22 with the sequence of like failures of large trading firms in the space. Market structure is a lot healthier this time around. Like there aren't like gross overextensions of leverage or unsecured credit in crypto in this cycle. But what there was just a large buildup of open interest and activity in perps, right, across the landscape, not just on centralized exchanges, but on new venues like Hyperliquid. And that is kind of what we're seeing play out right now, is just a broad shrinkage in volumes across the board on centralized exchanges. There's a sort of less demand for speculation, right? You can see that across a bunch of different metrics. If you look at implied volatilities on options, right? Or you look at how much futures trade above spot prices, those are all near kind of the lows that would indicate just a lack of retail interest in getting long crypto or being levered or having sort of like synthetic exposure to the asset class. And then combine that with sort of a little bit of a give back from the exuberance of the whole DAT era, right, of last year. Then we're talking about like the 100+ vehicles that raised money, $50 billion plus, if you kind of add everything all up. across the more well-established vehicles pouring money into Bitcoin and ETH and Sol, and then all the way down to, you know, much smaller ones like $100 to $500 million market cap raises. All of these did eventually allocate into crypto, but are now all trading below net asset value on the shares. And so there is no more dry powder to come into the tokens themselves, because the shares are below the net asset value and can't be sold into the market anymore to go buy more tokens. So yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing. It's a little bit of a it's going to happen every time you get over your skis, you know, in the sense that the market got a little bit over leveraged and there was a little bit too much speculative fervor. But I think this is relatively healthy. Like, we're just sort of consolidating down here. It does take a little bit of a mental shift where capital comes back into crypto, and I would say out of speculative assets like stocks and commodities. And, you know, the metals rally obviously pulled a lot of eyeballs away from crypto. Same thing with, the hot sectors in the stock market, like quantum stocks and rare earths and other, defense and AI names. I think at some point, all of that money will come back to crypto. But the question is, obviously, when will it happen? I know a lot of people put that towards the end of this year. And like you said, that's sort of what most people have on their timelines. There's a lot of open questions, right? End of the year, like the outcome of the midterm elections here in the U.S. and a corollary to that is obviously like what happens with the market structure bill. So yeah, a lot of open questions.
Yeah, honestly, what you were saying there reminded me about how earlier in this year, people kept talking about how fintech and crypto were converging. And it's very similar in the sense that now I'm just seeing that it feels like crypto is just part of like the wider markets. And so before, where it felt like money in crypto kind of stayed in crypto, now it feels like, there are investors that just see it as yet another option among many different asset classes. So in a moment, we're going to talk a little bit more about, when we might see things coming back to crypto and kind of what factors would, bring more volume back. But first, we're going to take a quick word from the sponsors who make this show possible.
The Energy Network is an intelligent, decentralized grid that coordinates smart devices to balance supply and demand. Energy Dollar is the native token of the network from one of Europe's fastest growing energy startups. Follow at Fuse Energy on X to find out more.
If crypto taxes feel overwhelming, you are not alone. That's why Crypto Tax Girl, a team that's been helping crypto investors since 2017, is offering $100 off on one-on-one crypto tax help. To get $100 off your crypto tax services, go to cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained. Again, that's cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained. Back to my conversation with Josh. I have seen a lot of commentary on Twitter that people feel like, I don't know if it's necessarily like gold has peaked, but just when they look at different charts, they feel like this is the moment when they might see momentum coming back to Bitcoin. And I wondered what you thought of that theory.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're in a year of just several years of unprecedented things happening back to back. But I think we all lived through, one of the most dramatic moves in what is supposed to be a store of value, like gold and silver, these sort of precious metals that are sometimes an uncorrelated part of people's portfolios. And yet, we had pretty drastic moves, 30% plus move in silver, 15% and plus in gold, right? I think these are good indicators that we had reached a bit of a blow off top. And obviously today you see like gold is up substantially again. And that's in the face of equities and crypto continuing to be weak. So there's it is its own asset class and its own league right now, right? The types of people trading gold are perhaps just trading it idiosyncratically relative to everything else. And so it is actually kind of amazing, right? What it does show is just how much like the retail impulse is driving asset classes these days. The last time we kind of saw stuff like this was with GameStop, right? And the sort of the power of the retail investor moving asset prices. But that was obviously a much smaller asset class. Like that was in the order of like tens of billions of market cap versus gold being, tens of trillions, right? So it is amazing. It is amazing. It's something I never thought I would see, but it is, and it also, I think, should remind all of us that those types of moves used to happen a lot in Bitcoin too, right? Bitcoin used to have these sort of like 20% up. Nowadays, it's like very hard to imagine Bitcoin moving up because it feels like a very heavy asset class. But I think once the sort of retail mindset comes back and focuses on Bitcoin, you'll see stuff like that again. And alts too, right? Like alts are relatively forgotten at this point. It's not even, people aren't even trading positive catalysts as triggers for buying the tokens, right? So you could see like there was a fairly interesting announcement actually around like WorldCoin. They announced a partnership with OpenAI. That was already kind of speculated a while back, but just to see that put in place and to see maybe some application for an interesting technology that's very much crypto inspired, right, had very little impact on the token. I think the token ripped maybe 20% or so, but immediately gave back its gains. There's a lot of stories like that. It's like these very micro rotations. It just goes to show a lot of that money that's coming from one token to another in crypto is just recycled crypto native capital. There's very fresh like retail money that's coming in to bid asset prices.
All right. So another big part of the market that everybody was talking about last year was the DATs. And they obviously were kind of a driver of some of the hype around certain tokens. And at the moment, a lot of them are underwater, including, some of the big name ones. Obviously, Strategy was, the original, the OG DAT. And BitMine is another one that people are talking about being underwater. And I wondered, first of all, what you thought was going to happen to that sector. And then if you thought that whatever happens there could have a wider impact on the crypto markets.
Sure. So I think what everyone has landed on with the DATs is that it is entirely a game of attention, right? So when there's only one DAT, like with MicroStrategy for most of its existence, it could attract retail inflows and it could have this amazing sort of reflexivity around rallies in Bitcoin, and it being the only sort of equity alternative access vehicle almost into crypto at the time. It gave it a lot of this sort of upside convexity, right? Like Bitcoin would go up, it would go up more because of this NAV premium and expansion. What we see now is like with the proliferation of hundreds of these vehicles, and actually a lot of money coming into them from traditional investors, as the sort of primary raises, and then ultimately in the secondary markets, a lot of retail investors also. Most of those investors are down on the trade, right? Because a lot of them were buying above NAV if they were buying in the secondary market, and in the primary markets even, they were buying when the market was relatively hot, but unlocking into a market that's relatively weak, because most of these had 3-month or so registration periods for the shares. So that's kind of where the market is today, right? It's almost like a lot of buyers or would-be investors in these products have been burned somewhat, and attention is so diluted across a bunch of different names that it's hard for any one name to really break out and stand out and attract fresh inflows in a meaningful way, at least inflows to offset the sort of like selling outflows of those primary investors. So I think it's not inevitable that a lot of these will trade below NAV forever, right? I think what will happen is that there's going to be strong winners, and we've already seen like each category kind of has one dominant player that you probably know, and I probably know, like they've already gotten maybe like a huge lead in terms of AUM. Maybe their management teams are pretty well regarded and notable and always on CNBC.
But the ones that come to mind for me are Strategy and BitMine, which are the ones that I named, and they're underwater. So I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, agreed. But like some of those names are still performing relatively well relative to peers, even in their vertical, right? So it sets up situations where you have maybe a stronger currency to acquire other currencies in the market. It also sets up situations where some players have better economies of scale, like they can run larger operations more efficiently in terms of staking or mining or what have you, and also just efficiencies in terms of raising investor awareness for their stock.
Okay, so you don't see them having a wider impact on the crypto markets?
I think, right. I mean, we have seen a few of the DATs engage in activities where they're buying back shares or maybe even pivoting the business towards like real world assets or other forms of operating businesses. I don't think that's generally right now. There hasn't been like a sustained trend where a lot of these vehicles are selling tokens. I think we'd get a lot of lead time before that really materializes. We would basically see filings where investors would be seeking to be activists and to be involved in sort of like the management of these companies, the boards, the sort of like the strategies around accumulation or even buybacks. So we haven't seen an enormous amount of activity there, but I expect, just given that these are very easy to understand vehicles and Wall Street investors are very smart and can figure out, if there's value to unlock, that there probably will be at some point.
All right. So one other big news event that happened recently that had a big impact on the markets was the naming of Kevin Warsh as the next Fed chair. And I wondered what you thought of that pick and what effect you thought it would have on the markets, once he takes that position, and in particular, what effect it would have on crypto.
Yeah. So the surface reading of that was that, Warsh is generally viewed to be more hawkish, more conservative when it comes to the balance sheet of the Fed. The initial, and obviously a bull for the dollar, right? So I think the general thought was this would be a challenge and a headwind for risk assets and for crypto in particular. I think we saw a little bit of that, like this sort of knee-jerk reaction that Bitcoin faced when actually it's kind of through reading like polymarket odds, right? A lot of people are kind of following those odds throughout the evening. And that sort of, was correlated to actually price action in Bitcoin and other risk assets. I think that movement has somewhat accelerated over the weekend into today. And that's kind of what we're seeing today. It's just like a lack of buying sponsorship in Bitcoin, in other crypto assets. There's sort of still this overhang from the Warsh nomination, but also just generally concerns that even other risk assets are starting to move lower. You saw maybe a couple of triggers in the last couple of days. You saw kind of some weaker earnings on some of these names that have come out and reported. You saw maybe some concerns around OpenAI and NVIDIA and the investments that are happening in the AI space. And all of these are trickling down into equities first, and then obviously crypto.
All right. So in a moment, we're going to talk a little bit about some more futuristic parts of the crypto markets. But first, we're going to take a quick word from the sponsors who make this show possible.
The world is about to see one of the largest infrastructure shifts of the century. New technologies are using more energy than ever before. But our legacy grids can't supply the demand. And we are barreling towards a global bottleneck. So Fuse is rebuilding it. The energy network is an intelligent, decentralized grid that coordinates smart devices to balance supply and demand. The network harmonizes existing infrastructure, increases grid capacity, and unlocks low-cost, clean energy. Energy Dollar is the native token of the network. The more electricity the world needs, the higher the demand for the energy network. The value of energy dollars may fluctuate. From one of Europe's fastest-growing energy startups. Follow at Fuse Energy on X to find out more.
If you're looking for help with crypto taxes, Crypto Tax Girl is offering $100 off for Unchained listeners. They provide personalized crypto tax reports and returns, and spots before April 15th are limited. Go to cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained to save $100. Once again, the link is cryptotaxgirl.com/unchained. There's another bit of news that people have been talking about a lot, which is super interesting, which is to see that at the same time that volume is leaving the crypto markets, we have recently saw that Hyperliquid was enjoying a lot of volume based on perps around metals. I think equities is a part of that. So talk a little bit about, what you think the significance of that is.
Yeah, and I mean, hype itself, the token and the volumes on its platform have been a rare bright spot for crypto over the last couple of months. We have it's actually become one of the most actively traded assets for our client base. It is almost like a safe haven hiding spot for a lot of liquid crypto funds who are mandated to have fundamental views on crypto tokens and must hold them in the portfolio. It's actually been a relatively strong performer as well, right? You've seen it rally almost 50% from the low 20s all the way up to even the mid to high 30s in the last couple of days, on the back of what you're describing, which is the growth in HIP3 volumes. And I think your audience probably knows HIP3 was set up to permit sort of the permissionless creation of new perp markets. And most of the new creators have focused on real world assets like equities and commodities. In particular, in the last couple of weeks, with all of the volatility in the precious metals market, we've seen enormous growth in silver and gold perps. That is surprising, as you can imagine, for a crypto native platform to see non-crypto assets really leading the tables in terms of volumes and open interest. But that's driven a lot of activity on Hyperliquid, in the order of, I think, $3 to $4 billion per day of HIP3 related volumes. And it's also driving meaningful revenue, right? Because there are fees associated with trading these markets, and they accrue to the protocol. And the protocol is actually paying them to token holders in the form of buybacks of the token. So I believe it's on the order of like $4 million of revenue per day is being generated on the heightened volumes. So if you survey the whole crypto landscape and you try to figure out where revenue is accruing, Hyperliquid's up there. It's like a top 3 in terms of revenue, and the other 2 are stablecoins, right? Tether and Circle. So we know that there are areas in crypto where there are real use cases. There's real utility. People are still building meaningful products that are useful to consumers. One is stablecoins, and almost diametrically opposite to that, and sort of very volatile speculative realm is things like Hyperliquid. I would also put things like Polymarket and Kalshi into that bucket, where people are using them to trade and to take positions, but they're generating real value for their shareholders.
Yeah. And then with the HIP4, we might see Hyperliquid also competing with Polymarket and Kalshi. But to me, when I look at that, and I also see, I'm sure you saw on Twitter, there was a comparison about volumes on Binance versus on Hyperliquid. And it sort of looks like that we're almost at some kind of inflection point where DeFi is really competing head to head with centralized exchanges, or on the cusp of doing so. And I wondered if you could talk about, what you think those structural changes will be in the market for crypto this year.
Yeah, I do think that this has been a widely debated topic with the trader community, especially people who are avid followers of market structure and how that's evolved in crypto over the years. It does kind of feel like, the question of what will happen to what had been the largest part of crypto, which is the offshore kind of less regulated centralized exchange market. Some of the biggest companies in our space are in that category, and they are certainly amongst the most influential and most politically important, maybe the largest spenders of lobbying dollars as well. The question has always been like, what does that look like in the long run? And I think with the rise of Hyperliquid, and also even sort of reading the drafts of the market structure bill, like you can kind of have some idea that maybe a lot of those volumes that were concentrated there will get dispersed into other parts of crypto. And one part will be more regulated venues and more TradFi alternatives to crypto native venues. So I'm talking about things like the ETFs themselves, like IBIT. you could see, IBIT open interest is oftentimes now exceeding Deribit open interest on the options. So that's already sort of starting to displace what we would consider like our own, native marketplaces that were created by crypto native people. And then on the other side, as always, hyper liquid and lighter and all these other venues, we're starting to see people migrate that way because it is more transparent. In some ways, it's more predictable, even though a lot of people argue like these are also centralized exchanges. But the rule set and actually kind of the degree of transparency that you can get, it also does depend on like the managements of these companies, right? Like and the protocols themselves. Like there are certain folks that are managing these protocols and have a great deal of trust built up with the community, and can speak very candidly about the developments on their platform and what they're trying to do. And I think that says a lot, right? I think we're starting to see like a greater demand for transparency, for accountability, and I do think like the stuff like the market structure bill will just accelerate that.
Okay, so last quick question, because I know we're basically at time, but I'm sure you saw all this activity around OpenClaw and Moltbook and all this stuff going on with these AI agents. Plus, at the same time, we have the Ethereum Foundation kind of finally implementing this ERC 8004. We have the X402 standard. I wonder if you're looking at that and if you have any ideas on how this agentic commerce or agentic activity with crypto will affect the markets this year, and if there's any particular tokens that you feel like might benefit from that.
Yeah, I sort of caught the tail of your last your last segment. I don't have any particular meme coins to promote there. I mean, I think it's going to be net beneficial for internet native, value transfer mechanisms, which crypto's in that category. I do think it'll probably benefit stablecoins the most. That's what is most widely used. I do think that, it does open up the door, I would say, for new layer ones that can support maybe more privacy oriented transactions. And you've seen that as a sort of mini trend this year, right? With the rise of Zcash and some other, long dormant like privacy coins like Dash and Monero. I do think that will be a key part if this becomes like a full-fledged agentic AI-driven economy where, small micropayments in stablecoins that are like more anonymized and also more untraceable will be important. And like always, I think the regulation is always a little bit behind on this type of stuff. So we'll have to see kind of how it shakes out in terms of allowing for these types of things. But we've already started hearing, how to build these types of privacy-enabled chains with compliance to KYC and AML. And that's, I think, the most interesting area to build in.
All right, Josh. Well, I'm so glad that we got to chat with you today. The listeners should know we pulled together this episode last minute because we knew everybody would want to know what's going on in the markets. And Josh, yes, it was always, or as always, it was such a pleasure to chat with you.
Same. Great to chat.
And thanks everyone for joining this live stream, and we will catch you tomorrow.